Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel once before. So the last beer that I reviewed from these guys came about 18 months ago, if memory serves me correctly, a lovely double IPA, and this brewery, from what I gather, have built a reputation for being very experimental and for doing all these different styles of beer very, very well. But the beer we're having a look at today is one of their latest releases through Systembolaget here in Sweden. It's a style that I very much enjoy and also a style that I haven't tried from these guys before. So needless to say, I'm very, very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then we are going to head to Visby, which is the capital city of the island of Gotland here in Sweden, the northernmost and largest of the two islands off the east coast of Sweden. And we're going to have a look then at my second beer from Shed Brewery. So this one is number 17 in one of their different series, but it's called Your Lemonade Stand is on a Big Plane. It comes in at 11.3% ABV, and they're describing this one as an American-style barley wine. But this beer was released as part of the Lokalt Osmoskaryd assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for April of 2023. The main reason I was attracted to this one was because I hadn't had anything from Shed in quite a long time, but I also enjoy a good American barley wine. So yeah, two reasons I guess we could say then that this one kind of caught my eye, and you will see another beer reviewed from these guys on the channel at some point very, very soon. So yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what it's all about. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Shed Brewery before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated. And remember, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries as well. You can go into the homepage too and search for beer using the geography tagging system. Just use the search bar, put your hometown, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever you like in there. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Swedish playlist along with many other things. And yeah, you can check out the playlist of beers from other countries too. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a wee bit about Shed Brewery once again. So, Shed Brewery was founded by Rob Bowe, who is originally from Australia, and he was a home brewer, but then back in 2012 he bought a second-hand 15 square metre shed and turned it into a little brewery. So his beers soon gained popularity, and he later moved on to a brewery at Stora Hässnäs, just to the northeast of Visby, quite close to the airport. And at this point he was joined in the company by three owners. This was Simon Svenefjord, Jesper Salston and Erik Engström. And they completed together the renovations of the new premises in 2015, and this meant that they could increase their brewing capacity from 3,000 litres of beer per year up to 25,000 litres of beer per year. One of the really interesting points about this brewery is that they have their own beer bus, and they use this to go around Sweden and serve their beers at various different festivals. It's something I'm yet to see, but something I would love to see. But in 2018, Christian Skiving joined the company, and he helps out a lot with the various day-to-day happenings at the brewery. But from the early days in the new brewery facility, they've run an on-site pub, but in 2019 they expanded this to be a proper brew pub. And these days they also host their Beer Week in July, which hosts various different breweries from across Sweden, including pretty much all the ones that you'll find on Gotland. And Rob and Christian also own the Fridge Folköl shop in central Visby, which they opened in March of 2021. Now remember, in Sweden, anything that is 3.5% and above has to be sold in Systembolaget, the state-owned monopoly, but anything 3.5% and below can be sold privately. So these beers that they'll sell in the Fridge Folköl shop are 3.5% and below. But these guys have continued to expand year on year. They've continued to get their beers out there a little bit more and into the national releases on Systembolaget. And as of April 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 90 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. And as I said earlier, they've done various different styles. So this is a brewery that are very, very small in terms of their size of operation, but they do lots of different styles, and they are definitely worth checking out based on my previous experience with them. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Shed Brewery for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram as well to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all of the different beers that these guys have done. But I really do hope I can get over to Gotland at some point fairly soon. I'd love to have a little look around the island and see what it's all about, but to go to the Gotland Beer Week I think would be quite an interesting thing to do as well. But yeah, let's get on and actually have a little look at this beer and see what it's all about. So, as you can see, this beer has been sold in a 330ml bottle. I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one. Very, very simple, and I think this is quite similar to what we had from Shed Brewery before. It tells you a little bit about the beer on the back here. It says, located on the limestone island of Gotland, Shed Brewery has produced awesome beers since 2013. Our latest edition celebrates the beer drinker's freedom to sing along freely. It's a tribute to misheard lyrics. Enjoy this quality brew. Cheers, Shed Brew Crew. So yeah, a beast of a beer with an intense malt profile, American hops and oak tones. But yeah, as we said earlier, 11.3% American style barley wine. This one you can see it's a plain black bottle cap on this, and you've also got the QR code on the back that you can have a little look at too. I'm not sure if this will work in the video, but yeah, maybe you can scan that actually. But yeah, I'm really not sure how much I paid for this one. I want to say about 65 kroner or something like that, so that's about €6.50, £6 sterling, somewhere in the region of $7 American, something like that. So not bad for 330ml of an 11.3% barley wine. But let's get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. My first beer from these guys in quite a long time actually. But yeah, it's behaving itself. We'll get it out into the glass and see what it's all about. Oh, this does look pretty nice actually. Now, one thing I will say about this one for being such a, a small brewery, there was no sediment on the bottom of the bottle there. So either I'm thinking maybe I should have left this beer to age a little bit longer. With barley wines, you do sometimes need to leave them to mellow out a little bit, but still, it could be a sign that they've brewed this quite nicely as well, actually. So remember, the barley wine, when it comes to the barley wine, there are two different varieties in my mind, the English barley wine and the American barley wine. The English one tends to be a little bit more kind of roasted and toasty, a little bit more of a grainy bread character, roasty caramel, and the fruits are a little bit drier. The American ones tend to be a little bit more kind of sweet and oily, in my experience. But the barley wine essentially is the big brother of an American West Coast double IPA, and the modern New England, the modern triple and quadruple IPAs that you get these days use the IPA malt to hop ratio, but they basically put more malt in and match the hop to malt ratio, so it's not quite the same thing. Pale ale, IPA, double IPA and barley wine are all related to each other by having slightly different malt to hop ratios, but yeah, you get the idea. But anyway, before the head disappears on this one, we can talk about the appearance first. You can see that this beer poured with about a two-third finger of a frothy, I would say kind of cream fawn coloured head. There's a mix of very small kind of foamy bubbles on this one, but you've also got like a little bit of a medium sized bubbly character in there as well. But on top of that, you can see the head is kind of fading away to just be a very thin foamy layer, and at 11.3% ABV, you'd kind of expect that, to be honest with you. But appearance-wise, I have to say this beer looks like a very, it kind of comes across as very much of a more West Coast double IPA type beer actually. It's got a lovely, very kind of deep amber colour to it. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or any adjuncts you put in will affect the colour of your beer as well. When it comes to barley wines, you can influence the colour of these quite easily by using different barrels. But yeah, mainly it is to do with the type of malts and the length of the wort boil as well. Going by the colour of this one, I would you know, suggest that this hasn't had too long of a wort boil. It's one of the lighter and more amber coloured barley wines I've had, and you would, to be honest, expect a beer such as this to be a little bit more of a kind of chestnutty mahogany type colour. So I think this has had a relatively short wort boil. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there, but overall it does look pretty nice. But as I say, a nice kind of very slightly naturally hazy dark amber colour, this one. It looks very good, but as I say, the appearance of this beer really reminds me of some of the kind of stronger West Coast double IPAs that I've come across before. A few little bits of sediment particle kind of floating around in this one. You can see that when you shine the light through the beer, but yeah, definitely not the darkest of barley wines I've come across. It does look a little bit more like a kind of West Coast double IPA, this one, rather than anything else. But I think that's everything we need to say about the appearance of this beer. We can have a wee look at the aroma and just see how we get on. Oh yeah, it's interesting. So, straight away with this beer, the aroma of this one, there's a lot of kind of butterscotchy, butter candy type character coming out of this one. It's a very kind of sweet beer, this one. If I was to, I reckon if I was to smell this beer blind, just on that first little note that I've had of it, I'd probably think this was like an old ale or something like that. I think barley wine wouldn't be my first choice of style for this one if I was smelling it blind, actually. But there's a lot of like butterscotch, butter candy to this one. There's a good little bit of bready character in there. Not too much in the way of like sharp and ready fruity character, but there's just a little bit of a hoppy presence to it as well. So yeah, it's quite a. It really is quite an interesting aroma, this one. I certainly wouldn't have picked if I was doing it blind. I certainly wouldn't have picked out that this would be an American barley wine, to be honest with you. Absolutely not. But the thing is, as I've always said, you know, you can talk about different styles of beer all days and try and put beers in different boxes. That's not the most important thing. The most important question should be whether the beer is good or not. And yeah, we'll find that out when we actually taste it. But yeah, aroma-wise, this is pretty damn interesting, I have to say. So the backbone of the beer, I would go as far as saying that you've got a nice little bit of a kind of fresh wholemeal brown bready bread crust coming out of this one. So yeah, a little bit of a wholemeal brown bready bread crust to the beer. On top of that, you've got a little bit of a kind of crackery note. There's a few little woody and slightly nutty elements coming out of this beer as well. So yeah, a little bit of kind of fresh brown bready bread crust. I'd say more of a brown bready bread crust actually, rather than a white bready bread crust. Yeah, brown bready bread crust in the base, a little bit of woodiness there, Jacob's cream cracker, and then on top of that, yeah, absolutely on top of that, there's a little bit of a wholemeal brown bready sort of thing in this one, which goes together quite nicely. So you get the bread crust, the cracker, the wood, fluffy wholemeal brown bread, and then on top of that, there's a little bit of a more kind of white bready character coming out of this one as well. And the white bready character has a wee bit of graininess to it, I have to say. Yeah, there's a little bit of a white bread and a kind of wholemeal. There's a bit of a more graininess to the white bready character in this beer. Now I'm curious, does this one have? It just says barley malt on the side, but it says it's got a little bit of candy sugar in it, which I was wondering why. That's maybe why the bread smells a little bit odd in this. And adding candy sugar into beer, it's actually a more of a. It is actually more of a kind of Belgian brewing technique, that one, although I know a number of West Coast IPAs have also used a little bit of candy sugar over the years to give you a little bit of that kind of purpley grapey type flavour that you can get in some of them. But yeah, for me, the brown bready notes that you get out of this are actually very, very sweet, and it's like a wholemeal brown bready sweet note that you get out of this one. But on top of that, you can absolutely smell there's a bit straight up sweet caramel to this one. There's original butter candy, butterscotchy notes in there, and a little bit of McVitie's digestive biscuit as well. So yeah, the way that everything goes together in this beer is really quite interesting. So yeah, the way this beer goes together, I think, is is very, very nice. The malty side, I'm really just curious to see how this goes together. It's certainly, if I compare this to American barley wines that I've had before, it's certainly not the sweetest smelling of American barley wines, and I don't think this has had a particularly long wort boil either, otherwise you'd have a bit more prominence of the brown sugars and a little bit less bready character to it, but this is a very, very bready smelling barley wine, I have to say. Yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the kind of malty and yeasty side of the aroma. Let's have a look at the hoppy side of things then. So for me, the beer doesn't have too big a green component. It's a little bit more, there's a little bit of earthiness in there, a little bit of herbal character, and a wee bit of floral note. But for me, the green component, it really is more kind of grassy rather than anything else. So yeah, a little bit of a lighter grassy sort of note to the beer. And it's quite smooth. It doesn't come across as being overly zesty or anything like that. So yeah, the way this beer goes together in that sense is pretty interesting, actually. But yeah, I would say that overall, it's quite, it really is quite mild in terms of its hoppy character, to be honest with you. I just noticed that the best before date on this beer is the 14th of the 3rd, 2025, so I'm guessing that this beer was bottled sometime in the middle of March, and of course we got this one for the April release through Systembolaget. So this, I guess you could age this one for about 2 years and you might get a few different notes and things out of it. And that's one of the things you have to be careful of with barley wines. You do have to let these age enough, so maybe I'm just opening up this beer a little bit too early. We need to keep that in mind when we try it. But yeah, on the fruity side of things then, just to round off the aroma, for me, the fruity side of the aroma, there's a little bit of, there's a lot of kind of oily pear coming out of this one. So yeah, lots and lots of oily pear in there. There's a good little bit of a kind of sultana type note to the beer as well. Yeah, so a good little bit of a kind of sultana, you know, dry white green grapey note out of this one. A little bit of oily pear in there. Maybe a little bit of fresh green apple as well. And yeah, the way that that goes together, I think, is really quite nice. The way everything pieces together in this beer really is quite interesting. This is one of these beers that really piques my interest, but I am wondering from the aroma profile on this one if I have maybe opened it just a little bit too early. But there's only one way to find out. But as I always say, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck in. But I think it is about time that we try this one. So this is your lemonade stand is on a big plane at number 17 from Shed Brewery in Visby over on Gotland, an 11.3% American style barley wine. Let's try this and see what it's all about. Sláinte, skål, cheers. Yeah. I'm going to say straight away, it's one of these beers it comes across as being very kind of raw, and it still has a little bit of that kind of homebrewed type vibe to it, actually. The one thing, maybe, did I say it or not? This beer, it's kind of, the aroma of this one was really reminded me of being a little bit more like an old ale rather than a barley wine. And there are various different types of old ale, of course. But I will say that straight away on the flavour profile of this one, it does come across as more of like a very strong West Coast type IPA, this one. So yeah, I don't know if it quite crosses the barley wine threshold, because it's not quite fruity and oily enough, and it's not quite sweet enough in the malt base. It does come across more like a very strong West Coast double IPA, this one. But like I said to you, the barley wine and the double IPA are related to each other quite closely. So yeah, it's quite interesting. I would say that overall it is one of the more bready examples of a barley wine that I've come across. I think that is most definitely fair to say. Definitely a more kind of bready leaning barley wine rather than anything else. Yeah, interesting stuff, I have to say. Yeah, so where do we finish off? Or where do we start with this one, I was going to say. We take the middle third of the palate, as we often do. So the backbone of this beer, absolutely, you get a little bit of that kind of fresh, white bready bread crust in there. And it does have a little bit of grainy dryness to it as well, which is quite interesting. So yeah, a little bit of a grainy wholemeal brown bready bread crust in this one. Further forward on that middle third of your palate, you certainly get a little bit of woodiness out of the beer. There is a layer of kind of crackery character coming out of this one, and then you start to get a little bit of the more wholemeal brown bready character coming out of the beer too. Yeah. The way that that goes together out of this one is quite interesting. That the backbone of this beer is very light, woody and sort of crackery. So yeah, the bread crust, the wood a little bit further forward, the Jacob's cream cracker, then you've got the kind of wholemeal brown bready notes coming out of this one. So yeah, above the kind of crackery notes, yeah, you have this quite grainy layer of like wholemeal brown bread in there. It builds a little bit of sweetness the further into the aftertaste you go, but then above that you have a more dense white bready character coming out of the beer. So that's interesting as well. The white bready notes give you a little bit of sweetness too, which certainly strike my interest too. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The wholemeal kind of brown bready notes in there. You've got the mix, the wholemeal brown bread and the kind of woody character of this one linger into the aftertaste. And then you've got above the white bready layer, you start to get the brown sugars. So for me, there's like a circle in the middle of your palate there. And it's interesting because it's got a very kind of like Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type layer to it, this one. So yeah, you've got that Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy layer. And then in the dead centre of your palate, you have the big, oily, sweet, caramelly notes coming out of it. But yeah, straight up big, oily, sweet caramel in the middle. Big, oily, sweet caramel in the middle of your palate there. Then a little bit of a more kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity note. Maybe a teeny little bit of toasty caramel underneath. But then yeah, you've got that plate of like Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy sort of thing coming out of this one as well. And then yeah, as I say, you've got the white bready layers kind of underneath this one. So I have to be honest and say this one kind of, it reminds me of like a very raw attempt at an American barley wine, like, you know, a kind of first home brewing attempt at an American barley wine. Like it's got quite a lot of breadiness to it. It's very, very sweet. It's more, this beer really is a little bit more like a kind of West Coast, like a West Coast double IPA than being a straight up barley wine. It just needs to have a bit more kind of straight up caramel and biscuit to it to make it a barley wine in a sense. But 11.3%, you could argue, yeah, it is just a very, very strong West Coast double IPA, this one. You could also argue in this case that it just needs a little bit more time to mature. But, you know, there's maybe things in here, I would be curious to see the recipe. It maybe just needs a little bit of a longer wort boil or something like this. Because I do get the feeling there's not a lot of the kind of leathery brown sugary character in this beer. And I get a feeling that this one just hasn't had all that long a wort boil. Because otherwise, yeah, you'd get a lot more of that leathery brown sugar out of this one, which kind of defines a barley wine for me. But really a very bready take on the style. But I think that covers the middle third of your palate in this one, and that's where the complexity of this beer really is. So on the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you get a little bit of a kind of bready build up in there. It's a mix of white and brown bread. The base of the back third of your palate has a little bit more bread crust to it, and as I've always said, more bitter and dry flavours come out further back on the palate, the sweeter flavours come out further forward. So yeah, you have this little bit of you absolutely have this little bit of a more kind of dry bread crust. You know, you've got the drier cracker above that, then the wholemeal brown bready layer, which is a little bit lighter and more airy, and then the fluffier white bready layer above that, which again is a little bit taller and more airy. And above everything else, you start to get some of the kind of yeasty notes out of the beer too. So on the yeasty side of things, you've got a really light, airy, kind of farmhousey brown bready note on this. You've got a wee bit of a kind of kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity note in there, a bit of sweet caramel as well. It is really like honeycomb. I always get honeycomb from yeasty characters in beer. So yeah, lighter, airy, more farmhousey brown bread, a little bit of honeycomb wrapped around it. But what you will find with this beer is that generally in the middle of the palate, the flavour sweetens up the further into the aftertaste that you go with this one. And definitely back third of the palate, you can feel the flavour is taller. Then as you come further forward into the middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. In terms of the hoppy side of this beer then, we'll go to the green component next. In the back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, it's got a little bit of a more kind of floral aromaticity to the beer, and you get a little touch of dank, kind of piney resin underneath. And as you reach the front corners of the palate, you do get a nice little bit of spicy, floral aromatic quality out of this one. Based on the green component of this beer, I do wonder if there's a little, I think Chinook is probably involved in this one. I've got a feeling that this beer is like Chinook and Cascade. The fruity notes out of this beer are just very, very classic. But round the front curve of the tongue, you can feel the beer is a little bit lighter and more grassy, but there's still quite an oily character to the green component in this one. It has a wee touch of zestiness there. But yeah, the kind of pine resiny notes I think will be from Chinook rather than anything else. But yeah, let's have a wee look at this. So yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the green component of this one. But let's have a wee look at the front third of your palate then. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of bready build up in there, and it's kind of like a mix of sweet, white and brown bread in there. The base of the front third of the palate has a little bit more of a kind of bread crusty note, and then you get the wholemeal and white bready characters on top of that, and then a lovely kind of sweet, oily, yeah, you get a lovely sort of sweet, oily, fruity character on top of it too. So again, I do think the fruity nature of this beer makes me think Cascade and Chinook. I really would not be surprised by that. At the back of that front third of your palate, you get a little bit of that kind of straight up oily grapefruit that you would always expect of Chinook. But then as you move further forward, you get a more oily, kind of passion fruity sort of thing. And you start to get, as you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, there's a big sort of oily, peary type note and a wee bit of a kind of sultana note, you know, kind of dry white green grapey notes in there. So that's there. And as you move into the front half of that front third of your palate, you start to get some of the kind of red fruity notes out of the beer. So yeah, there's a wee bit of like a slightly figgy character to this one. There's a very slight like black currant note in there as well. So yeah, there's little bits of this going on. But yeah, for me the fruits are really more, yeah, black. It's a lot more kind of oily and peary. Quite a good little bit of like sultana. You've got a little bit of pear in this one, a little bit of sultana and things. Yeah, quite a little bit of sultana, quite a little bit of pear, and then yeah, you've got a wee bit of the grapefruit behind that. As I say, I really think Chinook and Cascade in this one. A lot of the notes and the slightly red fruity kind of thing, the slightly fig, black curranty note out of this beer, though it's just screaming out to me that this is, yeah, a little bit of Chinook, or a little bit of Chinook and a little bit of Cascade. There could, you could have of course used Bramley's Cross from England in this one, which would give you some of the similar notes. That's the classic hop when it comes to English style barley wines. But for me, this beer, it really is a more bready take on the American barley wine, but I think that could just be down to the fact that the beer, generally speaking, we have to remember this is a very small brewery, so their beers in a sense do have a little bit of that kind of raw, homebrewed type character to them. They haven't been refined quite as much as you'll find from other breweries. So that's a really interesting point to make about this one. But I think we've described the flavour of this one as much as we can. Let's just round off the review with a wee look at the mouthfeel. For me, the mouthfeel, it's kind of bottom end of full bodied. The carbonation is very smooth. It's quite a thick, oily mouthfeel that you get out of this one. So that's worth pointing out as well. Big, thick, oily mouthfeel making its way out of this beer. But on the, yeah, like I say, on the bitter side of this beer does still have quite a little bit of bitterness to it, and of course you can age this beer for a bit longer and the bitterness will drop further out of it the more you go along, but it still has about 70 or 80 IBUs coming out of it. So yeah, big 70-80 IBU note out of this beer. The malt base in this one, you can feel there's a bit of graininess underneath, a bit of smoothness in the middle, and a bit of sweetness on top. And it gives you a little bit more of a dryness the further into the aftertaste that you go, but you've got a little bit of that more kind of oily, juicy, fruity character coming out of this one. So, yeah, the way that goes together in this beer is really quite interesting, actually. It has a little bit more, if we're putting this in style categories, it comes across as more of like a very strong West Coast double IPA, but it has a bit of that homebrewed rawness, you know, in the yeasty character of the beer. The bitterness in this one has to be at least, you know, 60 or 70 IBUs at most, at least I should say. Yeah, about 70-ish IBUs, but that will drop out with time, of course. The malt base we've described, the fruity notes are very oily and kind of dry. It's just a really interesting beer, this one. I like things like this that test my palate a little bit and just make me think, but a very raw take on an American barley wine. It has a little bit more English character to it from the kind of dry breadiness and graininess that the beer has. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. This was the, if I remember the name right, Your Lemonade Stand is on a Big Plane, number 17, an American barley wine at 11.3% ABV from Shed Brewery in Visby on Gotland here in Sweden. A really interesting beer, this one. I can feel the booze going to my head a little bit with this beer because it is 11.3% ABV, but it's still very nice. I think we can leave it at that for this. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Shed Brewery as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But until then, Slange Scott, cheers, check out my social media, check out Shed Brewery social media, and I'll see you guys on the next review. Slange Scott.